Es mi primer noche aquí, susurró la joven Apache al ganadero, temblando de temor. The night came slowly over the wide land, bringing with it a deep silence that felt heavy and endless. The sky turned dark blue, and stars appeared one by one, bright and cold. The wind moved gently through the dry grass, carrying the smell of earth and wood smoke. Far from any town, a lonely ranch stood under the open sky. It was not a large place, just a simple house, a stable, and a few wooden fences that creaked softly in the wind. The young Apache woman stood near the doorway, holding her thin blanket close to her chest. Her body trembled, not only from the cold but from fear that sat deep inside her. Everything around her felt strange. The sounds were unfamiliar, the shadows felt too long, and the silence was different from the one she knew back home. This land was not hers, and these people were not her people. "This is my first night here," she whispered softly, her voice barely louder than the wind. The rancher stood a few steps away, watching her carefully. He was a man who had spent many years on the frontier. His face showed lines shaped by sun, dust, and hard work. He had seen difficult things in his life, but he had learned to hide his feelings behind calm eyes. He heard the fear in her voice and understood that this night would not be easy for her. He nodded slowly, as if choosing his words with care. He did not speak much, but his actions often spoke for him. He pointed toward the house, letting her know where she could rest. The door was open, and a small oil lamp inside gave off a weak, warm light. It was not much, but it was better than the darkness outside. The young woman took a few careful steps forward, every movement filled with doubt. Her eyes moved from corner to corner, noticing every detail. The wooden floor creaked under her feet, making her pause. Her heart beat fast. She had learned to stay alert, to listen closely, because danger often came without warning. Inside, the house smelled of leather, dry wood, and old metal. It felt empty but safe enough for now. There was a simple bed in the corner with a rough blanket folded on top. The walls were bare and the window was small. She could still see the stars through it, reminding her of nights spent with her people, sitting near the fire, listening to stories from elders. Those memories made her chest tighten. She sat down slowly on the edge of the bed, still holding her blanket. Her hands shook. She did not know how long she would stay here or what would happen to her next. All she knew was that she was alone, far from everything she understood. The land outside this house held dangers she could not name, and the people who lived on it were strangers. The rancher remained near the doorway, giving her space. He could see that she was trying to be brave, but fear showed in her eyes. He cleared his throat quietly, breaking the silence. "You can rest here," he said in a calm, low voice. "No one will bother you tonight." He did not want to frighten her by staying too close. He knew that trust did not come quickly, especially on the frontier, and especially for someone who had already lost so much. Outside, the night deepened. The sounds of insects filled the air, and somewhere far away, a coyote called out. The sound made the young woman tense again. Her body remembered danger, remembered running, remembered hiding. She pulled the blanket tighter around herself and lay down carefully, her eyes still open. She tried to calm her breathing, but her thoughts moved quickly. She wondered about her family, about whether they were safe. She wondered if they thought of her, if they looked at the same stars and felt the same sadness. Her heart ached with longing for familiar voices and faces. The bed felt strange beneath her, too soft in some places and too hard in others. She missed the ground, the way it felt solid and alive beneath her body. She missed the sound of her people breathing nearby, the comfort of knowing she was not alone. A tear slipped down her cheek, but she quickly wiped it away. She did not want to show weakness, even if no one was watching. Strength had always been important. Survival depended on it. The rancher stepped outside and closed the door gently behind him, leaving it slightly open so she would not feel trapped. He walked toward the stable, checking on the animals one last time before resting. The horses shifted softly, sensing the quiet tension of the night. He moved with care, his thoughts heavy. He had agreed to let her stay, but he knew the risks. The land was unsettled and fear lived on both sides. Helping her could bring trouble, but turning her away would have been something he could not live with. He believed that even in harsh times, people still had a choice. When he finished his work, he sat on a wooden crate near the house, looking up at the sky. The stars reminded him of how small he was compared to the land and time itself. He wondered how many nights she had spent under the open sky, unsure of what morning would bring. Inside, the young woman finally allowed her eyes to close for a moment. Sleep came slowly, like a cautious visitor. Every small sound made her stir. The wind brushing against the wall, the soft creak of the house settling, even her own breathing felt loud. She dreamed of her home, of warm fires and familiar songs. In her dream, she was walking freely without fear. But the dream faded quickly and she woke with a quiet gasp, realizing where she was. Her heart raced again and she sat up, listening. Everything was still. She took a deep breath and tried to steady herself. This place was not home, but for this night it was shelter. She reminded herself that she had survived many nights worse than this one. She was still alive. That had to mean something. As the hours passed, the fear slowly loosened its grip. The darkness did not feel as sharp. The stars outside began to fade as the first hint of dawn touched the sky. A pale light crept through the window, bringing with it a sense of quiet hope. The young woman watched the sky change color from deep blue to soft gray. Morning was coming. She had made it through her first night. It did not mean her troubles were over. It did not promise safety or happiness, but it meant she had endured. And for now, that was enough. Outside, the rancher stood and stretched as the light grew stronger. He looked toward the house, knowing she was inside. A new day had begun, and with it, the chance for understanding, however small. Neither of them knew what the future would bring. But that first night, filled with fear and silence, had passed. And in its quiet ending, something new had begun. Morning arrived quietly, as if it did not want to disturb the fragile peace of the ranch. Soft light spread across the land, touching the dry grass and wooden fences with a gentle glow. The air felt cool and clean, and birds began to sing from hidden places. For the young Apache woman, waking up in this new place felt strange. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then the memories returned and her body stiffened. She sat up slowly on the bed, listening. The house was calm. No loud voices, no sudden movement. That helped her breathe a little easier. She folded the blanket carefully, the way she had been taught since childhood, and placed it beside her. Even in an unfamiliar place, she held on to small habits that gave her comfort. When she stepped outside, the world looked different in daylight. The land stretched wide in every direction, open and empty in a way that felt both freeing and frightening. She could see the stable, the well, and the long fence lines. The rancher was already awake, moving with quiet purpose as he worked. He did not seem surprised to see her. Instead, he nodded in a simple, respectful way. She stood still, unsure of what she should do next. Back home, mornings were shared with others. There were clear roles and familiar tasks. Here, she felt unsure of her place. The rancher noticed her hesitation and pointed toward a bucket near the well. He showed her how to draw water, using slow movements so she could follow. She watched closely, then tried herself. The rope felt rough in her hands, but she did not complain. When the bucket rose, filled with cool water, she felt a small sense of success. It reminded her that she was capable, even in this unfamiliar world. The morning passed with simple work. She helped where she could, carrying small items, sweeping the porch, and feeding the animals under the rancher's quiet guidance. He did not speak much, but his patience made her feel less like a burden. Every task helped her understand this new rhythm of life. Still, her mind often drifted. The sounds of the ranch were different from the sounds of her people. She missed the familiar language, the laughter, and the songs that once filled her days. Sometimes, when the wind moved just right, it carried a sound that made her heart jump, only to realize it was nothing she recognized. When the sun climbed higher, they rested for a short while. The rancher brought out simple food and placed it on the table. He waited, giving her time. She hesitated at first, then sat down across from him. Eating felt awkward. She kept her eyes lowered, aware of every movement. Yet the food gave her strength, and with each bite her body felt steadier. As the days passed, a pattern formed. Mornings were for work, afternoons for quiet tasks, and evenings for rest. The young woman learned how to tend to animals, how to clean tools, and how to move through the ranch without fear of getting lost. The rancher watched her progress with quiet respect. He noticed her strength, not just in her body but in her spirit. Sometimes misunderstandings happened. A gesture meant one thing to her and something else to him. When this happened, confusion filled the space between them. But instead of anger, there was patience. They learned to slow down, to observe, to understand without many words. At night, she often sat outside watching the stars. They were the same stars she had always known, and that gave her comfort. She spoke softly to herself, using her own language, reminding herself of who she was and where she came from. The rancher did not interrupt these moments. He understood that silence could hold meaning. Still, fear had not completely left her. Every distant sound made her alert. She remembered times when danger came suddenly, without warning. Her body reacted before her mind could comment. The rancher noticed this too. He began to move more slowly around her, announcing his presence with small sounds so she would not be startled. One afternoon, as she worked near the fence, a group of riders passed far in the distance. She froze, her breath caught in her chest. The rancher saw her reaction and quickly placed himself between her and the open land, not in a threatening way, but as a sign of protection. The riders passed without stopping, but the moment left her shaken. That evening she could not rest easily. Her thoughts raced and her hands trembled. The rancher sat nearby, sharpening a tool. He did not speak, but his presence felt steady. Slowly, her breathing returned to normal. She realized then that trust was growing, not through promises but through actions. Days turned into weeks. The young woman began to feel less like a visitor and more like someone who belonged, even if only a little. She started to understand the rancher's routines and moods. He, in turn, began to recognize her expressions, learning when she needed space and when she needed reassurance. One morning, she surprised him by starting a task on her own without being asked. He watched her quietly, then gave a small nod of approval. That simple gesture filled her with pride. It reminded her that she was not just surviving but adapting. Despite this progress, her heart still carried sorrow. At night, she sometimes cried softly, careful not to be heard. The loss of her old life weighed heavily on her. The rancher did not know the details of her past, but he understood pain when he saw it. He had his own memories that kept him awake at night. They were two people from very different worlds, brought together by circumstance. Neither fully understood the other, but both were learning. In small ways, they shared their humanity, through shared work, shared silence, and shared endurance. One evening, as the sun set in warm colors, the young woman stood beside the rancher, watching the land. For the first time, she felt something close to calm. The fear had not disappeared, but it no longer controlled her every thought. She knew challenges still lay ahead. The land was uncertain and trust took time, but she had crossed an invisible line. She was no longer only afraid. She was beginning to hope. As the stars appeared again, she lifted her face to the sky. This place was not home, but it had become a place where she could breathe. And in that simple truth, a new chapter of her life quietly took shape. The change did not happen suddenly. It came slowly, like the way seasons shift without asking permission. The young Apache woman continued her days at the ranch, moving through the same tasks, but something inside her began to open. The land no longer felt completely foreign. She learned which paths were safe to walk and which places were better left alone. She learned the sounds of the ranch, the creak of wood, the soft steps of animals, the way the wind changed before nightfall. Yet even as her body adjusted, her heart carried a heavy weight. Some memories refused to stay quiet. They returned in the middle of simple moments, catching her without warning. A smell of smoke could pull her back to another time. A distant shout could make her hands tighten and her breath grow shallow. These memories did not come as clear pictures. They came as feelings, loss, fear, and longing mixed together. The rancher noticed these moments. He saw the way her eyes would suddenly lose focus, the way her posture changed as if she were ready to run. He did not ask questions. He knew that some stories were not ready to be spoken. Instead, he offered quiet support. He stayed nearby. He kept his movements slow. In his own way, he tried to make the present feel safer than the past. As days passed, they began to understand each other without words. He learned when to give her space and when to offer help. She learned his habits, the times when he liked silence and the times when he was willing to listen. They were careful with each other, like two people walking on uncertain ground. One afternoon, while cleaning near the storage shed, she found an old object half covered in dust. It was worn smooth by time. She picked it up gently, feeling its weight. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Her hands remembered similar objects from her earlier life. The memory was sharp and painful. Her throat tightened and she had to sit down. The rancher saw her from a distance and approached slowly. He did not touch her. He simply knelt nearby, letting her know she was not alone. She kept her eyes on the object in her hands, struggling to control the rush of feelings. When she finally looked up, their eyes met. There was no judgment there, only quiet understanding. That moment changed something between them. It was not a full conversation, but it was a shared recognition of pain. He realized that her past was not just difficult, it was deeply rooted in loss. She realized that he was not blind to her struggle. He saw her, even when she did not speak. That night, sleep did not come easily for either of them. The rancher sat outside longer than usual, listening to the night. He thought about his own past, the people he had lost, the choices he had made. The frontier had taken much from him too. He had learned to survive by keeping his feelings buried deep, but watching her brought those feelings closer to the surface. Inside the house, the young woman lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Her thoughts moved back and forth between what was gone and what remained. She missed her people with an ache that never truly faded, but she also recognized that she was still alive, still standing. That strength had come from somewhere deep within her. The next morning, she woke before sunrise. The air was cool and the sky held soft colors. She stepped outside and watched the land awaken. For the first time since arriving, she felt a quiet connection to this place. It was not the same as home, but it was land, and land had its own spirit. That thought gave her a small sense of peace. She began to take on more responsibility at the ranch. Without being asked, she checked on the animals and prepared tools for the day's work. The rancher noticed and allowed it. He trusted her more now. Trust did not come easily to him, but her actions earned it. As they worked side by side, she sometimes shared small details about herself, not full stories but pieces. A gesture, a word in her language, a quiet hum of a song she barely remembered. These moments were fragile like thin glass. The rancher treated them carefully. He did not interrupt or question. He simply listened. One afternoon, dark clouds gathered unexpectedly. The wind picked up, carrying dust and tension. The animals grew restless. The rancher moved quickly to secure the area, and the young woman followed without hesitation. Together they worked in silence, moving with urgency but without panic. When the storm passed, the land felt different, cleaned, renewed. They stood together, looking at the sky as it cleared. The moment felt symbolic, though neither spoke of it. Something heavy had passed, leaving space behind. Still, danger was never far. The frontier held constant uncertainty. News traveled slowly, but signs were always present. Tracks in the dirt, distant movement, sudden quiet. The rancher remained alert, aware that protecting the ranch meant staying prepared. The young woman understood this instinctively. Her life had taught her the same lesson. One evening, as they shared a simple meal, she finally spoke more than a few words. Her voice was soft, hesitant, but steady. She spoke of walking long distances, of leaving behind places she loved. She did not give details, but the emotion was clear. The rancher listened without interrupting, his attention fully on her. When she finished, silence filled the space. It was not uncomfortable, it was respectful. He nodded slowly, acknowledging her words. He did not try to fix anything. He knew some wounds could not be healed by answers. After that night, the air between them felt lighter. She had shared a piece of herself, and he had accepted it without pressure. That acceptance mattered more than words. Yet even with growing trust, fear had not disappeared. Sometimes she woke from restless sleep, heart racing. Sometimes he noticed her standing near the edge of the land, staring into the distance with worry in her eyes. The past still followed her and the future remained uncertain, but she was no longer facing it alone. As weeks continued, both of them changed in quiet ways. She stood taller, her movements more confident. He smiled more often, even if only slightly. Their lives had crossed at a difficult time, but that crossing had brought unexpected strength. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in warm colors, they sat outside without speaking. The land stretched out before them, vast and silent. In that silence there was no fear, only understanding. The young Apache woman realized that her past would always be part of her. It shaped her, taught her, and hurt her, but it did not have to control every step forward. The rancher realized that helping her had also helped him face parts of himself he had long ignored. The weight of the past had not vanished, but it had shifted. And in that shift, both of them found the courage to keep moving forward, one day at a time. The quiet rhythm of life on the ranch continued, but the peace they had begun to build was fragile. One morning, the young Apache woman noticed signs of movement far in the distance. Dust rose along the horizon, forming shapes she could not identify. Her heart tightened. She had learned to read the land, to sense danger before it arrived, and something about this felt wrong. She approached the rancher quietly, pointing toward the dust. He squinted and adjusted his hat, his expression serious. He recognized the danger instinctively. It was not just strangers passing through. There was intent in the movement, a presence that could not be ignored. He nodded for her to stay back while he moved closer to observe. For the first time since she had arrived, the young woman felt real fear creeping into her bones. She remembered nights of hiding, of running without knowing where safety lay. She clutched the edges of her blanket, her hands trembling slightly. The rancher noticed but did not scold or speak harshly. Instead, he placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, a gesture that spoke more than words could. As the riders came closer, it became clear that they were not ordinary travelers. Their expressions were tense, their movements deliberate. The rancher quickly made a plan. He whispered instructions to her, keeping his voice low and calm. "Stay inside, lock the doors, do not make a sound." In that moment, the lessons of weeks past, the careful observation, the steady movements, the quiet patience made sense. She knew she had survived difficult nights before, but this was different. This was no longer about adjusting to a new life. This was about survival. Inside the house, she watched from the window as the riders drew near. Shadows fell over the porch and she held her breath. The rancher stepped out to meet them, his figure strong and steady despite the tension in the air. The young woman could see the exchange from afar. The riders spoke in low tones, their faces unreadable. Time seemed to stretch, each second heavy with uncertainty. She felt every muscle in her body tense, ready to react if needed. Memories of running, of fleeing danger, returned sharply, but she held herself still. She had learned to control fear, to wait, to observe. Finally, after what felt like hours, the riders moved on. The danger passed without confrontation, leaving behind only the distant echoes of hooves and dust. The young woman exhaled deeply, her body trembling from relief. She stepped outside cautiously, finding the rancher standing by the fence, calm but vigilant. He looked at her and nodded. No words were needed. They had faced fear together and both had emerged intact. The young woman felt a mix of pride and exhaustion. She realized that trust was not only about safety, it was about knowing that someone would act when you could not. The days that followed were filled with reflection and small routines that helped calm their nerves. The young woman tended to the animals with renewed focus, while the rancher repaired fences and prepared for any future threats. Each task became a way to reclaim control, to build strength against the uncertainty that surrounded them. During these quiet moments, she began to open up in ways she had not before. She spoke of her tribe in small fragments, telling stories of her people's traditions, the songs they sang, the way they celebrated life and honored the land. She did not reveal everything. Some memories were too sacred or too painful, but the pieces she shared brought them closer. The rancher listened without judgment, absorbing every word. One evening, as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the land, she walked to the edge of the ranch. She watched the horizon, remembering the nights she had spent under open skies, the freedom of running across plains with her people. A deep longing filled her chest, but it was tempered by a sense of connection she had not felt before. She was part of something now, even if it was not the life she had once known. The rancher approached quietly, carrying 2 cups of water. He handed one to her without a word. They stood together, side by side, watching the colors of the sunset deepen. In that silence there was understanding. Fear still lingered, but courage had taken its place. They had faced the unknown and survived. As darkness fell, they returned to the house. The young woman prepared for the night with care, setting her blanket and making the small space feel secure. The rancher moved around the house, ensuring everything was in order. Neither of them spoke much. Words were unnecessary after the shared experience of the day. Night came, and with it a quiet sense of vigilance. The young woman lay on the bed, listening to the sounds of the ranch. Each creak of wood, each rustle of the wind reminded her that the world was full of unknowns. But now she felt less alone in facing them. She had learned that trust was not given lightly, and courage was not the absence of fear. It was acting despite it. She drifted into a restless sleep, her dreams filled with fragments of past and present. She saw herself running across open plains, then standing beside the rancher, facing threats together. The images were jumbled but powerful, reminding her that life was unpredictable, yet survival was possible when courage and trust guided the way. Morning brought a sense of calm after the tension of the previous day. The young woman woke to the soft light of dawn, feeling a renewed determination. She helped with morning chores, her movements confident and steady. The rancher observed her quietly, noting how far she had come. She had grown stronger, more aware, and more capable of facing the challenges that lay ahead. In the weeks that followed, they continued to encounter small tests, unexpected storms, distant strangers, and the constant demands of frontier life. Each challenge reinforced the lessons of trust and resilience. They learned to rely on each other, not only for protection but for understanding. Their bond grew, rooted in shared experience and mutual respect. The young woman began to see herself in a new light. She was no longer simply a visitor or a frightened stranger. She was a survivor, adapting to a new world while carrying the strength of her past. The rancher recognized her courage, and in turn he allowed himself to trust again, letting the walls he had built around his heart soften. One evening, as the sun set in golden hues, they sat outside together, sharing a quiet meal. The land stretched endlessly before them, and in the fading light there was a sense of peace. They knew that danger would always exist, that life on the frontier was uncertain, but they also knew that together they could face it. The young woman smiled faintly, feeling a sense of belonging she had not expected. The rancher returned the gesture with a small nod. Words were unnecessary. The experiences they had faced together had spoken louder than anything could. That night she lay on the bed with a sense of calm. The fear that had once consumed her was still there, but it no longer held power over her. She had learned to act with courage, to trust when it mattered most, and to find strength within herself. The rancher sat outside once more, listening to the quiet night. He reflected on the events of the past weeks and recognized the change in both of them. They had faced uncertainty, fear, and danger, and had come through stronger. Their lives were intertwined now, shaped by shared experiences and the quiet bond of trust. As the stars appeared overhead, they both knew that the days ahead would bring more challenges. but they also knew that they were no longer facing them alone. In that knowledge, there was hope, and in that hope, the promise of a new chapter in their lives. The night deepened, carrying with it the lessons of courage, trust, and resilience. Both understood that life would not be easy, but they were ready to face it together. And in that readiness, the young Apache woman and the rancher found a quiet strength that neither had expected to discover. The days on the ranch passed slowly, each one bringing its own work and its own lessons. The young Apache woman had grown accustomed to the rhythms of this new life, but she had not forgotten the world she had left behind. Every morning she rose with the sun, moving with careful attention to her tasks. She fed the animals, drew water from the well, and checked the fences. The work was hard, but it gave her a sense of purpose and a feeling that she could contribute. The rancher watched her closely, noting her diligence and the careful way she handled each responsibility. He had come to rely on her presence, not just because she helped with chores, but because she carried herself with a quiet strength that reminded him of his own early days on the frontier. The bond between them had grown slowly, formed through shared work, trust, and the unspoken understanding of survival. One morning, as the young woman tended to the animals, she noticed a movement at the edge of the property. It was faint at first, just a shift in the brush, but her instincts told her to pay attention. She paused, listening, her body tensing. The rancher appeared beside her, calm but alert. Together they watched, ready for whatever might come. It turned out to be a lone traveler, a man carrying supplies and seeking shelter for the day. The rancher greeted him cautiously, keeping his hand near the side of his body, ready if danger arose. The young woman watched, noticing how he maintained a careful balance between caution and hospitality. It was a lesson she had learned well herself. The traveler stayed only a short time, sharing a simple meal and speaking of towns far away. The young woman listened, absorbing the words but not speaking much. She had learned that safety often came in small, careful steps. Trust had to be earned, not given freely. The traveler left as quietly as he had come, leaving behind only faint tracks in the dust. Life continued in its quiet rhythm, but the lessons of the frontier were never far from the young woman's mind. She had faced fear and uncertainty, learned to trust, and discovered courage within herself. Each day was a chance to test her skills, her patience, and her resolve. She understood now that survival was not just about escaping danger. It was about learning to live fully, even when the world was unpredictable. The rancher, too, had changed. He had spent years keeping his emotions guarded, believing that attachment could be dangerous. But he had come to recognize the strength in the young woman, and through her courage, he found a part of himself he had long forgotten. He had learned that trust could be a shield as powerful as any weapon, and that true courage often meant standing by someone else in difficult times. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned gold and pink, the young woman walked to the edge of the land. She stood quietly, letting the wind brush against her face. Memories of her tribe and her family returned, but they no longer carried the same weight of fear. She could remember and honor them without being consumed by grief. She had built a bridge between her past and her present, finding strength in both worlds. The rancher joined her, bringing a small lantern to light their path back to the house. They walked side by side, comfortable in the silence that had become part of their bond. Neither needed to speak. Their shared experiences and mutual understanding filled the space between them. For the first time since her arrival, the young woman felt a sense of true belonging. At night, the house was warm and quiet. She prepared for sleep, laying out her blanket and checking that the small details of the room were in order. The rancher moved about as well, attending to his own tasks with care. Outside, the stars twinkled in the clear sky, and the wind carried a gentle calm across the land. In those quiet moments, the young woman reflected on her journey. She had arrived at the ranch fearful, uncertain, and alone. She had faced nights filled with anxiety and days where every task felt like a challenge. But through patience, courage, and careful observation, she had found a sense of safety and purpose. The land that once felt alien had become a place she could navigate, a place that could hold her as she grew stronger. The rancher, meanwhile, reflected on his own transformation. He had met her as a stranger, someone needing protection, and over time he had come to see her as a companion and equal. Her presence had reminded him of the importance of empathy, patience, and the quiet power of human resilience. Their relationship was no longer defined solely by circumstance, but by mutual respect and understanding. Weeks turned into months. The young woman's skills continued to grow. She learned not only to manage the daily tasks of the ranch, but to anticipate problems before they arose. She repaired fences, cared for the animals, and even helped with small tasks that required judgment and foresight. Each day, she gained confidence, and her spirit grew stronger. The rancher noticed how her confidence had transformed her. Where she had once hesitated, she now moved with purpose. Where she had once feared the unknown, she now faced challenges with quiet determination. He felt pride in her growth, not as a mentor dictating her actions, but as someone witnessing her journey toward independence and strength. One afternoon, they encountered a challenge together. A sudden storm approached, dark clouds rolling across the sky, lightning flashing in the distance. The animals grew restless, sensing the change before it arrived. The young woman and the rancher worked in unison, securing the livestock, checking the fences, and ensuring the house was safe. Their coordination was seamless, a reflection of the trust and understanding that had developed over months of shared experience. The storm passed with minimal damage, leaving the land refreshed and clean. They stood together afterward, breathing in the calm air and the earthy smell of rain. In that moment, they realized how far they had come. They had faced fear, uncertainty, and the power of nature itself, and they had done so together. As night fell, the young woman prepared for sleep, but this time her mind was calm. She thought of her past with love rather than sorrow. She thought of her tribe, of her family, and of the lessons they had taught her. But she also embraced her present, the life she had built, the trust she had earned, and the courage she had discovered. The rancher settled nearby, observing her for a moment before turning his attention to the night sky. He felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that they had both grown stronger, that they had both learned to face the unknown with courage. Their bond was not defined by words, but by shared experience and mutual respect. Over time, the ranch became more than just a place to survive. It became a home, a space where the young woman could explore her potential and the rancher could find renewed purpose. They celebrated small victories, an animal well cared for, a repaired fence, a day without incident. Each success reinforced their confidence and strengthened the connection between them. The young woman began to teach the rancher small things from her past as well. She shared her knowledge of the land, the plants, and the stars, revealing a deeper understanding of the world that complemented his own skills. In return, he taught her techniques for ranch life, practical skills that ensured their shared space remained safe and productive. Through this exchange, they both grew richer in knowledge and experience. Seasons shifted, bringing new challenges and new beauty. Summer heat gave way to the cool touch of autumn. Leaves changed color, and the air carried a crisp freshness. The young woman observed these changes with attention, noting how the land adapted and how life continued despite uncertainty. She saw herself in a similar light, changing, growing, and adapting to the circumstances of her new world. By winter, she had become an integral part of the ranch. Her presence was no longer a source of worry or uncertainty for the rancher. Instead, it was a foundation of stability and strength. Together, they faced the cold nights, ensuring the animals were fed and warm, maintaining the fences and keeping the house secure. Their teamwork was seamless, a reflection of the bond forged through months of shared experience. In the stillness of one quiet night, she looked up at the stars and whispered softly, "I am here. I am safe. I am strong." It was not a boast but a quiet acknowledgement of her journey, a recognition of the courage she had discovered within herself. The rancher, listening from nearby, smiled faintly. He had witnessed her transformation from a fearful stranger to a resilient, capable woman. Her strength had inspired him as well, reminding him of the value of patience, trust, and compassion. Together they had built more than safety. They had built a life marked by mutual respect, courage, and hope. The young woman knew that challenges would continue to come. The frontier was unpredictable and life was rarely easy. But she had learned that fear could be met with courage, that trust could be earned, and that hope could grow even in the most uncertain times. She had found a place where she could stand tall, a space where she could embrace both her past and her present. As the dawn broke, painting the sky with soft colors, they prepared for another day. There was work to do, as there always was, but it no longer felt like a burden. Each task was an opportunity to live fully, to apply what they had learned, and to strengthen the life they had built together. In the quiet of that morning, the young Apache woman and the rancher shared a look of understanding. It was a silent acknowledgement of all they had faced and all they had learned. Their journey had been difficult, but it had brought them to a place of courage, trust, and resilience. The land stretched endlessly before them, a reminder that life would continue with its challenges and its beauty. They had faced uncertainty, fear, and loss, and they had emerged stronger for it. Together, they had discovered that survival was not merely existing. It was living with courage, embracing trust, and finding hope in the face of the unknown. And so, as the sun rose higher and the world awoke around them, the young woman and the rancher stepped forward into a new day. The past remained part of them, but it no longer defined them. They had built a life together, one marked by resilience, understanding, and quiet strength. And in that life, they found a promise of hope, a promise that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Their story, filled with fear, courage, and trust, had reached a point where it no longer needed endings or conclusions. It had become a life in motion, a shared journey shaped by experiences, growth, and the quiet bond of two people who had learned to trust and rely on each other. And in that shared life, they discovered that true strength comes not from the absence of fear, but from facing it, and facing it together.